Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fanalist Podcast, presented by Fantasy Data. Here's your hosts, Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder.
Welcome back, everybody. Billy and Bradley here for the Fantasy Football Fanalist, brought to you by Fantasy Data. And tonight we have an emergency podcast post the Cam Akers injury news. For those of you that have not heard, who don't have Twitter, living under a rock, whatever it may be, Cam Akers tore his Achilles today, ending his 2021 season. And this changes the entire outlook of this offense, and it changes the entire landscape of this backfield. And we just got done with this offense and their projections last week when we had Josh Larkey on the show. So we deemed it necessary to sit down and to update our projections and to update our listeners of what our projections are and what our thoughts are on this Rams team. Bradley, walk us through this Achilles injury. What does it mean for an athlete?
It's an absolute disaster for the immediate future for Cam Akers. You mentioned earlier that Cam Akers is going to miss the entire 2021 season. It's a long recovery, and these Achilles injuries can be tricky. We've seen over the last few years, players recover at different rates. If you remember a few years ago, Arian Foster tore his Achilles near the end of his career, and pretty much it ended his career. We saw Donta Foreman a few years ago tear his Achilles. He finally made it back after a couple years. He gave Derrick Henry a few blows for the Tennessee Titans last season. And then in week 2 last year, Marlon Mack tore his Achilles and was re-signed by the Indianapolis Colts and is expected to compete for a running back spot, depth piece behind Jonathan Taylor this year. We're expecting that Cam Akers can come back in 2022, but that's a long ways away, Billy. It's very difficult to predict, the timetables and how the team is going to address that need. I mean, let's jump into the backfield. Let's look at the next man up. And we spent a lot of time talking about him with Josh Larkey in the previous podcast. You and Josh debated the impact that Darrell Henderson was going to have on Cam Akers. And we saw that Darrell Henderson was very efficient. We saw that Darrell Henderson was on the field and was a pretty good pass blocker. We saw that Darrell Henderson, there were times last year where he had 15, 20 carries in a game when Cam Akers was out. And while our initial projections don't have Darrell Henderson carrying that ceiling that Larkey was talking about in the debate last week, certainly Darrell Henderson slots in as the number one. The Rams immediately came out today and said that they were confident in Darrell Henderson, and we shouldn't expect them to immediately sign someone. Although in going through the projections for the Rams backfield, it's almost impossible to see Darrell Henderson get the lion's share in the way that we imagine Cam Akers. And I can't see the ceiling there. In trying to figure out who's going to get the carries. I was even trying to give Bob Woods an extra 10 carries on the season to try to fill in that gap. They've got to go in and sign someone who maybe it's going to be an Adrian Peterson, maybe a Lev Bell, maybe Todd Gurley. There's been a lot of rumors, but I think that the Rams are going to wait until after training camps and the veterans get cut, like the Sony Michels of the world, the Melvin Gordons, those who are on the roster bubble.
Mark Ingrams,
the Kerryon Johnsons of the world. Look, this is ugly right now, but the Rams are a team with Super Bowl aspirations. They went out and they spent a lot of draft capital on Matthew Stafford. They're not just going to roll over and say, well, too bad for us. We're just going to roll with Darrell Henderson, a 3rd round pick who, well, we drafted a 2nd round running back last year to supplant him to be the lead. It just doesn't make sense for the Rams to stick with Henderson as the main back, which is why for me it's difficult to project Henderson for more than 210 rushes without even without someone else there. So, Billy, I don't know if you had a similar problem. I'm imagining that you did in going through those projections, but I think it really limits the ceiling. I don't have Henderson in the running back one conversation.
Yeah, you gave Henderson 14 carries a game. I gave him 15 carries a game, so not much more. Yours 210 versus my 225, very similar. I do expect this offense to bring in a veteran back of some sort. Whether it's any of the names that you just mentioned or not. I don't think that this team will be going into week one with the running backs they have on this roster. Otis Anderson, Jake Funk, Xavier Jones, Raymond Khalid. Did I say it right? Remember you corrected me last time. Yeah. So, I mean, you can't even pronounce some of these guys' names right now because they're not probably going to be playing here in 2021. Khalid does have some great speed, though. And, I mean, I think that he probably has the best chance if they did go off into the abyss with just this depth chart. But it's going to be ugly. I don't think that right now, prior to camp, that we can really put a finger on who's the running back 2 out of this group. I think it's a situation that we need to monitor. I think it's something that you have to monitor closely and just kind of, make sure that you're really tuning into camp because let's face it. I mean, Darrell Henderson was a round 10 handcuff. One of these guys, if they don't bring in a veteran presence, is going to emerge as that handcuff now to Darrell Henderson. And I'm not saying they're worth around 10, but they are going to be worth a late stab in drafts, especially if Darrell Henderson goes down. Now you have arguably the number 1 running back on this team. So make sure to do your research, make sure to do your homework, make sure to watch this camp battle closely because right now we just simply don't know who it's going to be. And we just have to make sure that we get a pulse on the situation before we deem that person. So
you mentioned Henderson being out for injury as a possibility. He struggled with ankle injuries during the first 2 years of his career. Ankle injuries tend to recur. Like it's very difficult to make a full recovery and not, you just don't have that trust in your ankles in the same way if you roll it. For me, when I was running a couple of years ago, I rolled my ankle really bad, and I'm not even a professional athlete, and I'm still worried about like the next time I'm going to take a step and boom, there goes my ankle. But let's hit on just a couple of these running backs. We'll just do a flyby. Raymond Khalid, you mentioned, was a 7th round draft pick last year. I believe he was originally drafted by the Buccaneers in the end of the 7th round. You mentioned he has very good speed, a 4.42, 40-yard dash, mostly a special teamer. He's 5'8", 177. He's not going to be a 1-2 down back, even if he gets on the field. Xavier Jones, I think, is a better fit for that 1-2 role if he were to sit in. He's 5'11", 208. But, I mean, just looking at his college stats, like his last year, his breakout year really was in 2019 where he had 244 rushes for SMU. Like at 25 touchdowns, like he was able to do that, but this guy was an undrafted free agent who we didn't see much in the preseason last year. He barely made the roster, was undrafted. He's almost 25 years old. This is, as I said, we have to be watching these camp battles very closely because maybe it's Xavier Jones. Maybe it's Jake Funk, who was a 7th round pick this year. A very athletic player, 98th percentile yards per carry, a 63rd percentile dominator rating, a college target share that was at least respectable. I mean, but he only had 60 carries as a career high in a season during his time in Maryland and only broke out this past year. He's also 23 and a half. Like perspective, Cam Akers is 22. So when we're thinking about like a dynasty perspective, let's shift away from like, I'm not even going to spend time on Otis Anderson, an undrafted free agent for the Rams. Like Cam Akers, he's 22. He's going to be 23 next year. Like he still has usable years in running back world. It's not like he's 25, 26, 27, and he has this Achilles injury. Is he a buy, sell, or hold in dynasty from your perspective, Billy?
I think if you're a team going out for a championship, I think he has to be a sell. I think if you are a team building for the future and you have, 2 years until you're competitive, I think he's a buy. I think it really depends upon your situation. If you're in the middle, I think you can hold. So I don't. I mean, I'm not really picking a side here because I think it really depends upon your roster and your construction and where you sit inside your league and the possibilities of 2021.
If
Because
you're a
Achilles,
middle team, I think he's a sell because you just lost what was projected for being a running back one on your team.
yeah, I was more saying like where are you at post injury? Like if I would say maybe you
Yeah.
were in the race probably before. Now you're in the middle. At that point, it's either a hold or you have to decide if you're gonna trade them away and try to go for it and compete after losing one of your top tier running backs, or if you're going to just hold and kind of ride it out for next year and wait. I think this really just depends upon your roster. Because I mean, Achilles injuries are tricky, and we briefly touched on it. But I mean, when they do this surgery, if it's too tight, it limits the range of motion. But if it's too loose, it becomes even more of an issue because it's almost like I saw a post today. It's like a guitar string that's out of tune. Was a good example that I was reading about the Achilles injury, and I mean, we saw what happened with Devonta Foreman. It took him 2 years just to even kind of really make it back to the field to look decent. We're going to see what's going to happen to Marlon Mack this year. I have more concerns when it comes to Achilles injuries, just because the running back is really needing all of those ligaments and muscles. I have concerns, and I had concerns prior to the injury as well. I'm probably selling Akers if I own him anywhere, just based upon my own personal biases with Akers as well as now the injury.
Well, if you can get Miles Sanders for Cam Akers at this stage in the game, I think you're.
We saw that trade today. That was unbelievable. I can't believe that happened. It blew my mind. Just how are you gonna hand away a running back of almost equal caliber just after the injury news? Someone panicked, is what that was.
But in a 12-team league, like is a 2022 second round pick gonna get you Akers?
I'm not sure that the person would give him up. I think that whoever owns him is going to hold him. I think they're going to want assets. They're going to want players that are give them a chance to still compete this year. But I think it's like, again, it all depends upon rosters and your league mates. There's no saying right now what somebody's going to give up for him. I think if I'm anybody, I'm holding and I'm waiting for any type of news, or I'm placing him on IR and I'm writing it out. I'm not selling him for a second, and I don't even like him.
Fair enough. Now, because we've hit on how this Cam Akers injury affects the running back position on the LA Rams. How do you think it's going to affect Matthew Stafford? Is this a no news sort of deal, or is this we have to bump Matthew Stafford up because he loses his number one or projected number one rusher?
I think that's the only thing that we have any kind of clear, concise outlook for this team here is I think you have to bump Matt Stafford up. We were talking last week to Josh Larkey about this being one of the most, I think his words were one of the most, not pass efficient or pass heavy, but one of the most that runs the most plays in the NFL. I don't think that really changes all that much. I mean, yes, losing your running back one hurts, but I think they just lean more on Stafford. I think we're going to see a lot more Robert Woods. I think we're going to see a lot more Kupp. I think you're going to see just, a lot more 3, even 4 wide receiver sets versus what we may have seen in the past. And I truly think that Matt Stafford gets a bump here. I moved him up to 635 attempts, which is 37 per game. So it's pretty high. 406 completions, that's 64%, with 4,689 yards and 30 scores. So I still have a very high outlook for these pass catchers as well as Matt Stafford. The running game is just a little shakier now. Of course, Darrell Henderson gets the bump, but I think I gave an extra 1% to Robert Woods and 1% to Cooper Kupp.
I agree. I bumped Matthew Stafford up as well. I saw Stafford go from, I think it was like 565 projected attempts to almost 600, like a sliver under 600, 4,600 passing yards as well, we're seeing Stafford. You and I are seeing Stafford pretty similarly. So for him, that projects out in my projections of fantasy points at quarterback 15. And I think that Stafford still has that back end quarterback one ceiling. But as we mentioned on the podcast, I believe with Larkey, Stafford is being drafted as a back end quarterback one, if not in the top 10. So I still think he's being overdrafted, but I see a little bit more of a ceiling, as we mentioned, because they're going to be more pass heavy. They're running a lot of passes, and they've got very capable pass catchers. They've got, as you mentioned, Woods and Kupp, also Deshaun Jackson, and 2 second-round picks, Van Jefferson and Tutu Atwell, in addition to Tyler Higbee. So we know Stafford's not going to rush much. We really can't give Stafford any additional rushing attempts despite losing the running back. But he may do a few more dump offs to like Darrell Henderson, who we saw be productive on third down and on the field and effective in a pass blocking. So teams can't like cheat now, because if Darrell Henderson's on the field, they're going to have to play for run or pass. And if anything, that might free up the offense, as funny as that sounds, that if Cam Akers is on the field, teams were not respecting the Rams last season. If Akers was on the field, they knew it was going to pretty much be a run play. He played against one of the highest stacked boxes in the NFL, most defenders in the box, and he was pretty good, but that's where his efficiency really took a hit. And I think that Darrell Henderson will continue being efficient because he's going to be available for all 3 downs. He may not play all 3 downs, but he'll be available for those. So teams have to respect it.
Yeah, I just think Cam Akers also has a lot more weapons here for the Rams. I mean, when he was in Detroit, he didn't have Golladay last season, and he still finished as quarterback 16 in fantasy points. He still finished 12th in passing touchdowns, 12th in passing yards, 13 in deep ball completion. I think that's why they went out and got themselves, Deshaun Jackson, as washed up as he is. He still likes to throw the ball deep. And he averaged 283.2 air yards a game last year. So he's a gunslinger. We've been saying that, all offseason, and that doesn't change here at the Rams. If anything, it highlights it. It heightens his gunslinger abilities. And I really think that it's a perfect fit for this offense. And I think that they're just going to lean on him. That's what we thought, even with Cam Akers healthy. And it just really heightens that, or I should say, highlights that opinion for me now, is that I just think that they're really going to focus on the passing game here inside this Rams offense.
But you mentioned earlier, actually off air before our podcast, Bradley, you gave an extra a total of 28 rushes to Robert Woods. I think a lot of those are going to be design sweeps. I mean, Robert Woods was already involved in the running game over the last 3 years. He's averaged 20 rushes per season. And with the bonus game, with losing a top rusher, I think Sean McVay is going to be forced to be more creative with how he uses his very explosive and capable players. Robert Woods being one. Cooper Kupp also had rushes last year. I think he had 4 or 5 rushes. But I think there's going to be a lot of involvement. More of these players, more of these dynamic players are going to get involved, and it's not just going to be Darrell Henderson getting a bump here.
Yeah, I definitely see Robert Woods getting an uptick. I think I moved from 16 to 19. I think it'd be hard for him to hit. I think his career high is 24. Yes, and 17, 19, and so I think somewhere between that 17 and 20 range is probably accurate. Maybe he sees a little bit more, but I just don't see. I don't see 3 or 4 wide receivers getting these jet sweeps. I think Robert Woods is going to get the majority of them, and you might see a sprinkle in from other wide receivers. But I definitely think that Robert Woods is going to see some more passing volume now.
Okay, and Tyler Higbee, obviously, that's going to be a bump as well for Higbee. We mentioned on the podcast earlier or last week that Gerald Everett, when he was injured, that was the game last season where Higbee went absolutely bananas. He went 5 receptions for 54 yards and 3 touchdowns. And when Everett was out at the end of 2019, we saw Higbee go absolutely bananas as well. So I think that in seeing Higbee through that light, that really there aren't tight ends who are going to push him for receiving volume. Like I have a combined 9% to the rest of the tight ends, but 10% to Higbee. And I think that's even a little low. I think I need to bump up Tyler Higbee a little bit more in light of how those targets are going to be distributed.
Yeah, I'm only at 10.5 at 71 targets. And I have 8% to the other tight end positions here. I could see that being more like 6%, and then Higbee being more in that like 11.5 to 12% range, would take him closer to the 80 target range. Higbee splits were much better when he did not have Everett on the field. And now that Everett's in Seattle, I expect Higbee to feast in this offense. And we've been seeing him kind of fly off boards as an early tight end option as well. Touchdowns I have him projected for 509 yards. That's 65% catch percentage. So that's 46 receptions. These are, preliminary numbers as we get into camp. Once we start seeing camp unwind, and if we're not seeing much of, Bryson Hopkins or Jacob Harris or Johnny Moon, then I think that these numbers will come back through and finalize them prior to week 1, and we'll probably see Higbee closer to 12%. It's the wide receiver core, just kind of going back to that I think there's a lot of targets that are going to be left up for grabs, and it's going to come down to that wide receiver 3 and who's going to emerge. I mean, right now I kind of have DeSean Jackson, Van Jefferson, and even Tutu Atwell all kind of in that same 8 to 9% range. Another camp battle to watch, because that wide receiver 3, whoever it is inside this offense, is going to produce numbers. And I'm right now leaning towards Van Jefferson as that number 3. But I think that that's another camp battle I really want to kind of hone in and focus on and really kind of just dissect prior to week 1 and make sure that I increase my ownership in whoever that is, because they're going to be useful. They're going to be productive. And if for anything were to happen to Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, who we have both between 22 and 24% target share, I think that person's going to emerge as a real threat at any given time.
You mentioned DeSean Jackson being a field stretcher. He's really struggled to stay on the field, to stretch the field over the last 2 seasons, only playing in 7 games.
You can be a field stretcher when you're being stretched off the field.
Maybe he stretches on the bench.
Yeah. Being carried off on
a bench stretcher. Yeah. Yikes. I mean, he has a 17.5 yards per reception in his career. He's 34, so he's been around the block, but I don't think Jackson has like a standalone value, even if like there's such an ambiguous wide receiver 3, as you mentioned. Van Jefferson has been getting a lot of, positive hype from Sean McVay. Tutu Atwell was drafted to be good. Like, you don't take a wide receiver in the 2nd round, the Rams, if you're not going to use him. Although that was the case for Van Jefferson last year. So, I mean, Atwell's 5'9", 155. Like, I don't even know where he's going to peg in. Like, he's only a dynasty target at this point.
He's tiny. It's going to be interesting to see how they use him. I could see special teams being a factor in the beginning. Outside that, it's really only going to be in the slot and on, maybe jet sweeps. I mean, that's another option there for another receiver on the team. But I don't see him, hitting he's out of those 3, even as old as DeSean Jackson is right now. And as concerned as we are with his injuries, I don't think Tutu Atwell sees the field more than either of those 2 if they're both healthy. That's between Van Jefferson or DeSean Jackson.
Definitely. And I mean, they moved on from Josh Reynolds. They saw that Josh Reynolds was not stretching the field in the way that they wanted and fitting with their plans to spread the ball around. I mean, Robert Woods is much more of like a 12 yards per reception type of player, and Cooper Kupp a little bit further down the field. But, you're hoping that DeSean Jackson can stretch the field. But if he goes down, it may very well be going back to the well of throw the ball 12, 15 yards down the field and hope that maybe someone breaks a tackle, because that's not, they're not going to be throwing. I think it's going to be really important for Deshaun Jackson to stay healthy to at least keep the rest of the offense honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm really excited. Like, camp's around the corner. I'm really excited to see all the teams get back at it. I mean, as down as I am today about the Cam Akers news, because I really wanted to see how it was going to play out, especially after the Larky debate. Like, the first thing I did when I saw that news is I messaged Josh Larky and said, "This sucks." I really wanted to see how this plays out, and now I think that really goes for this Rams team all in general. Is with camp around the corner, I want to see how things shake out, because kind of everything that we had in mind of how this team was going to operate just changed drastically, especially in the backfield. It threw a little bit of a wrench in the passing game. I mean, a good wrench, but I do think that there's a lot of different looks that this offense could possibly have now after this Cam Akers news. And I think it's a definitely benefit for Woods. I think it's a benefit for Kupp. I think it's a benefit for Stafford. I think it's a benefit for Higbee and all of these pass catchers, as well as Henderson. But the rest of it is to be seen.
So when Tom Pelissero tweeted out that Cam Akers suffered a torn Achilles, you mentioned that you reached out directly to Josh, and that's just, I think, from a fantasy community perspective, that's good sportsmanship. So hats off to you, Billy. But like, I tweeted out, this is immediately like, this is terrible. This is no victory lap for me or for, any other anti-Akers truthers. You never cheer for injuries. You never hope that you have players go down for that. And I said, from a fantasy perspective, like, my immediate reaction was Henderson's now like a back end running back too. But really, like, from a fantasy community perspective, like, how do we handle injuries? I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're checking ourselves, because we have very strong takes on players that, this player is going to pan out, this player is not going to pan out, and these are the reasons why. And we have to make sure that when, things don't go right for, when we are correct, but it's due to injury, that it's not us taking a victory lap, that we understand and do a little distilling and reflection ourselves of, okay, this is the reason why. And almost from an objective perspective, like, there's no way we can predict injuries for certainty, and we just have to hedge. Obviously with running backs, they're they're taking a lot of hits from different angles, but there's no way you can say, well, like, he's training away from a team facility and he tears his Achilles. So yeah, it's just a tough spot to be in, and I feel we all feel for all of the fantasy managers who have Cam Akers drafted on their teams, best ball leagues or otherwise. We feel for you today.
Yeah, I agree. There's no celebrating an injury. And I did a post today earlier stating that, because I knew a lot of people were going to come to me about this news, because I was, anti-Cam Akers prior to this. That hasn't changed, but it doesn't mean that, I don't care about a player's career. I don't care about his life. I mean, of course I do. This is the game I love the most. This is the sport I love the most. So anytime you see these type of injuries, regardless if you like the player or not, it sucks. And especially when you have so much invested into that player from a debate or from an opposition standpoint, you want to see how it's going to shake out. You want to see if your analytics are correct. You want to see if your analysis of the situation is correct. And you want to be able to then, plant that flag and say, hey, I saw it because of this reason, not because of an injury. Injury just derails all of that work you just did as well from an analyst standpoint. So, I hate to make this about the analysts and about the analytics side of it, but people from our side don't like to see this just as much as players like to see this, because of the work that people put on behind the scenes while you're researching these players and you're trying to, come out with takes. So it's never an injury to celebrate. I think it's poor fashion. It's poor sportsmanship. I'm fine people going out and say, like, today I went out and said, hey, this team looks better now, because I had a draft where I grabbed Henderson in the 10th. There was that 0 running back team that we built where we had Kelsey and Hawkinson. And I said, hey, if we can get 2 running backs, we're going to be gold. And guess who one of those 2 running backs is now? Darrell Henderson. that team is going to be deadly. But, that's not to me considered a victory lap. That's just me, hey, going back and looking at a draft and saying, hey, this team now looks pretty damn good. And people do that all the time on Twitter. So not to be confused with victory laps, though.
Yeah, and look, like people will say that all the time when we're drafting, like, well, if this player goes down with an injury, I got to get their backup. If this player goes down, what does the situation look like? And then we actually have those situations, come to fruition. Like, yeah, it's the game we play. As fantasy managers, we hedge that this is within the range of outcomes that a player's not going to be available. There was a trade I made. I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast where I had traded Cam Akers a few months ago for Calvin Ridley and like Harrison Bryant, and I was receiving Ridley and Bryant. And one of my league mates reached out to me today and said, looks like you won this trade. And I said, I mean, for now, who knows if Calvin Ridley, goes down with an injury in the next couple weeks. Ridley's already been battling a toe injury, I believe, this offseason. It's very within the range of outcomes that nobody wins that. And that's why, as much as I could have taken a victory lap on, oh yeah, like I definitely won that trade. Like that's not the perspective that you want to take. We're all trying to win in fantasy, but it's also about being good sports, both in the community and specifically in your leagues.
That's just one of the other reasons why I like wide receivers more in dynasty leagues than I do running backs, because of the longevity. Just like that, anything can happen to a running back. Running backs have the shortest career lives in the NFL. And, when push comes to shove, if I have a decision, if I'm able to move running back for a wide receiver, especially of that caliber, I'm making that trade, 7 out of 10 times, just depending upon my roster, the construction, what it may be. But, I remember you sending me that trade off air one time, and I said, I loved it for you. I loved Calvin Ridley. He's, your wide receiver 1 for 2021. He's my wide receiver 2, but not by much. And I think he's going to have, a wonderful career. I'm not worried about his toe injury at all going into 2021.
No. And looking at, even you mentioned like the short lifespan of running backs. Like if Calvin Ridley had an Achilles injury, like we wouldn't be talking about it in the same way. Realistically, like it's within the range of outcomes that this is career ending for Cam Akers. Probably not. But who is to say that this holds him back from being a dynamic player moving forward? And it's going to affect running backs in different ways compared to wide receivers and tight ends. Like OJ Howard is coming back from an Achilles injury, and we're not talking about OJ Howard. Oh yeah, it might be, he might have lost big time steps. No, we're talking about whether OJ Howard might win the starting tight end job over Rob Gronkowski right now. So, we really, when you're playing dynasty in particular, you have to keep in mind the positional values, not just short term, but also long term when injuries are impacting players. And this is the first of, let's be real, many dominoes that are going to fall. Over the course of the offseason, we see anywhere from 3 to 10 top 6 round picks go out for either short term or long term for injury. If you remember at the beginning of last offseason, or not beginning, near in the preseason, David Montgomery suffered what we had thought to be an MCL injury, and there was concern that he would miss weeks. He ended up not missing a single week because it was overblown and everyone freaking out. So it really is important for us to take time during this offseason, evaluate, what are the positions that I need? What are the positions that I'm going to have to work for depth for in particular? And to not overreact, to news. And also, if you get a trade offer, to always check the news for that player, because there were times where, as we mentioned, maybe that player who accepted the Miles Sanders for Cam Akers hadn't heard the Cam Akers news yet, and then they're SOL. So, another tip for playing fantasy football is definitely check the news on players if you're getting offered a trade. I mean,
hate players like that. I mean, it's real. It really is. We call them the Jobs of the world, right? They just throw out trade offers and hope that somebody clicks yes, and it's just sometimes it's just complete.
Garbage.
Thank you. I was going to say the word. I knew you'd correct me.
Absolute trash. Actually, there's nothing like waking up in the morning at 6:30 a.m. and having about a flurry of 4 Jobs offers in my sleeper notifications.
I don't even look at them anymore. I'm just like, nah, it's a trade offer from Jobs.
Oh, but please, I want to know if there's one day that a Jobs offer is like, that would be nice.
That's funny. Oh, all right, everybody. Well, anything else we want to finalize here?
Obviously, in redraft, if you've already drafted, I saw in Scott Fishbowl that some players have already started dropping Cam Akers. If you're in redraft and you've already drafted, you can drop Cam Akers. Matthew Stafford should be getting a slight bump. You can see him higher, but his ADP is already too high. So, I mean, take a stab at him if you want, but at least you can feel a little more confident in his ceiling now. Darrell Henderson should be a back-end running back 2 for you until we hear otherwise. He might be a usable running back 3 if a first and second down runner gets signed later on in the preseason. We should anticipate that role gets filled at some time, and that the wide receivers get I think a very slight bump if with the Matthew Stafford increase in volume. So I think that's a pretty quick summary. Any other things we're missing?
I'm going to probably bump Anderson up a little bit more than you are. I think he's been more of a mid-range running back too. I saw him go in the FFPC today in round 4 in about 4 drafts. I saw him go in around 6 in a super flex league, which would be round 4. So I would not be surprised to see him start sneaking in around 3 in some of these drafts, especially seeing that Akers was going in round 1. All depending upon what they do with the veteran presence. But I think Henderson will be, a pretty solid running back too for most of the year here for this offense.
Yeah, I think his ceiling is I had the highest projection for him. I tried to mess around with some of the projections. The highest that I was willing to go was running back 13, but I settled on running back 16. So that's going to be the projection right now for me. But yeah, we'll see where this goes. It's certainly worth monitoring, and worth monitoring who else is getting looks if the Rams are confident in some of their backup running backs like Jake Funk or Xavier Jones in particular.
Exactly. Well, everybody, camp's around the corner. Make sure to keep your eyes and ears open. Make sure to follow the beat writers if you are not, to be up to date on news. Also, speaking of being up to date, make sure to subscribe. Smash the subscribe, like it here. Make sure to follow, and so you're able to get the notifications whenever we go live or upload a new episode. Because this week we have a lot of shows. A lot.
Billy is killing it this week.
I'm going to be pretty busy this week, folks. So tonight we covered the Rams for those who tuned in late. And then we have Thursday morning. That's the 22nd. That's going to be 12 p.m. Pacific time. So 3 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to be sitting down with Scott Atkins from Full Time Fantasy. He's a co-owner over there, as well as the co-owner of FFWC. We're going to be discussing high stakes football over at the FFWC and Full Time Fantasy. And then we have Friday the 23rd is a big day. So Friday the 23rd, we have Sigmund Bloom coming on from the Football Guys. And we're going to be discussing the Pros vs. Joes draft that I did on the FFPC against Sigmund and as well as other players.
Billy's glad that I'm not going to be on that podcast.
Bradley didn't like my team. I thought it was money. Sigmund liked it. A lot of other high stakes players liked it. I'm going to side with them, Bradley. And then that evening, Bradley will be joining us as well as Ray Flowers from SiriusXM Radio. So he'll be joining us Friday night. That's going to be our normal time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 Eastern. We only got Ray for about 20 to 30 minutes, so we're going to be very efficient with our time, just as efficient as Darrell Henderson was with his touches in 2020.
Let's go.
and then oh, I missed the day. So tomorrow night, actually, so Wednesday the 21st, I skipped this one. I'm actually going to be recording with David Hubbard again as we do an FFPC football guys draft, and we're going to upload that to YouTube. We will not be live, so we can talk about our philosophy, our strategy, and our picks and everything that we did, just like last time. Just another week, another team, another dollar, and we're going to rock and roll. We're getting these teams pretty high. I think I'm already up to about 18 or 19 FBGs already, and I'm already up to about 40 best ball drafts. So I'm on pace for where I want to be. I wanted to be around 40 FBGs and about 60 to 70 best ball drafts. So I'm on pace right now. I'm excited.
So it's a full week for the fantasy football fanalists.
Very full week. So thanks for tuning in again. Subscribe, get the notifications, and we'll see you all back here tomorrow night. Bye-bye.